Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Groot Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Genos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy. And in this podcast, I'm going to bring you my top 10 high risk, high reward players for fantasy this season. Let's get it. Welcome on in, everybody. This is an episode we do every year. Always gives people something to think about. Some conversation always comes up in the Discord community afterwards. So always happy to put this one out to the people and get people thinking about different scenarios for different players. We don't know at this point, and we want to think through what are the best case scenarios for these players and what are also the worst case scenarios for these players. And for some players, those best and worst case scenarios diverge a lot more than others. So that's what we're going to tackle here today. Before I get into that, I do want to remind everybody about Drafters Fantasy. I've been playing a ton on Drafters Fantasy, doing a whole bunch of these best balls. It's an $11 entry NHL Best Ball Tournament, $50,000 in total prizes, including $10,000 to the first place team. And you can use promo code GINOS, GINOS, for a first time deposit match up to $100 if you want to get in these streets. I am somewhere in the 80s in the number of teams I've drafted. I've been going nuts over there. It's really interesting to think through. You don't want to take too many of one player. You want to make sure you balance it out so that, one injury doesn't submarine, half of your teams or something like that. But it's been a lot of fun. A lot of interesting stuff to get into there. A different version of fantasy hockey that I think is only going to get more and more popular in the coming years. So if you're interested in dipping your toes in those waters, a great way to do that is to use that promo code and play a little bit with somebody else's money. So join me in there. Let's not waste any time. Let's get into the first player. Nikolaj Ehlers has to be the poster boy for high risk, high reward. Like, how can I not include this player at this point? I think we all know the risk, right? Bad line mates. The early returns have not been good. It's been Scheifele, Connor, Velarde in practice lines, and that leaves Ehlers with basically the dregs of the lineup. It's not where you want to be if you're Nikolaj Ehlers in terms of the even strength deployment. And so that's going to be a little bit rough. But one thing we are getting is that we could be getting some power play one time for Ehlers. He was on the top unit in the first kind of lines that we got access to via the beat reporters coming out. And so that would be an improvement over what we've seen from Ehlers in the past. And that could really be a big key towards unlocking some extra potential. The reward that you can potentially get with Ehlers is just this sky high rate stats that he's always put up. He's always had just massive numbers under the hood that's always made us believe in the potential of Nikolaj Ehlers. It's really been about the deployment and him not being able to get that deployment that has really made us wonder if he can ever have that fully huge breakout season where he's scoring at a 90+ point pace. This is a guy, I've mentioned this before, but the IPP on this guy is absolutely insane. He has posted an IPP above 80% in 3 of the last 5 seasons. Last year was at 77%, so just missed that. He's continually posting shots per 60 marks up around 11, well above that 10 mark that I like to see. He's always putting up big individual scoring chance numbers. His on-ice numbers always look terrific. It's really been about the fact that the last 2 years, he's gotten under 16 minutes average time on ice. And so that's what we're looking for when we talk about Nikolaj Ehlers. He can absolutely do it all. But we do really need to see a little bit better deployment before we can fully believe that his potential be truly unlocked. And I don't know if we're going to see it this year, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't want to be the guy on the sidelines when Ehlers does have that pop-off 90-point season. I don't know that it's going to be this season. I don't think that's the most likely scenario for this season, but I definitely don't want to have none of Ehlers across my teams this year. I want to be sneaking him in there, and the price is not too bad on Ehlers. I think everybody's gotten a little bit sick of it. And I'm willing to, go through the headaches once again, because I do believe there is a season that will come where Ehlers absolutely pays off all of that potential and then some. Next up, Tage Thompson. The risk here is the new coach in town, right? What does a new coach do with a guy like Tage Thompson? Obviously, a ton of potential. You had that incredible 2022-23 season where he absolutely popped off. And then you have this past season where everything went sideways. We've talked about the injury narrative. We think that the injury did hamper Tage, and he had a huge end of the season. I think it was 21 points in his last 19 games or something like that is the stat that we've thrown around there. And I think that Tage Thompson could be in line for a huge bounce back. He played 1807 average time on ice last year, 1835 in that big year that he had. What if Lindy Ruff decides to play him for 20 plus minutes a night? What could be his ceiling in that case? But then you have the downside risk. Lindy Ruff may come in here and demand a little bit more accountability from these players. Tage Thompson, not a player known for his defense, although it did improve last year. And will Lindy Ruff, decide that Dylan Cousins is the more responsible player and give him a lot more even strength minutes as a result? I think Tage Thompson's spot on the power play is absolutely secure, but can he actually be a true number one center in the league, getting 20 plus minutes and really fulfilling all that potential that we saw in that 22-23 season? The reward here, if everything does go right, though, is absolutely sky high. Could be an absolute league winner where you're getting him in the third and fourth rounds of your drafts this year. 50 plus goal potential, 350 shot potential. All of that is on the table for a guy like this. Yeah, 11.5 shots per 60 last year, 12.2 the season before. And even the season before that, you go back 10.9. So it's not like he was that far off the season before that. This is definitely a guy with a ton of potential. And I'm really hoping that Lindy Ruff is the guy to unlock Tage Thompson to his full potential. He did increase the offensive output of the Devils when he first went there, and I think he could do a similar thing for Buffalo, so I'm holding out hope that this is the year that Tage Thompson absolutely fulfills all of that potential for us in fantasy. Next up, Jason Robertson. Similar story to Tage Thompson. Huge 2022-23 season, and then takes a pretty big step back. Last season really disappointed his fantasy managers there. And so I think that's a potential worry for this player. And on top of that, now he's dealing with an injury in camp that it sounds like it's going to pretty much keep him out of all of training camp, and he's going to have to just kind of go straight into the season without having the advantage that other players will have of having had the training camp and some preseason games and everything to kind of get started. And there's even risk there. What happens if he misses even more time? Something doesn't go quite right as he's coming back and you're actually starting to miss time and get into the season. That's obviously a worry here as well. The other problem is Pete DeBoer in Dallas. He's got this system. He's one of these coaches that doesn't really give, 20 plus minutes to his top players. So even though Robertson is the guy who gets the most even strength ice time, I don't know if Robertson has that ceiling season where he's actually getting 20 plus minutes a night and is considered, by DeBoer at least, to be that elite of a player that he has to give him this kind of ice time. I don't know if that's the case here. Last year, 18-19 average time on ice. The year before, the big season, 1850. So it was more on efficiency rather than just, volume of time on ice that Robertson was able to put up that huge season. And you start to look at the underlying rate stats and you start to wonder if Robertson's big season in 22-23 was less of a breakout and more of just a really good season in terms of all his efficiencies. He had huge shot numbers that year, but this past year came right back down to more of where he was earlier in his career. And so was that season just an outlier where everything was going perfect for him? And this is more of the player we should expect Robertson to be. All of those questions are in your mind here, but there's also the potential reward if he gets back closer to that 19-minute range. Even if he doesn't get to 20 minutes, we've seen before what he can do even in the 1850 range in 22-23. And then what if Wyatt Johnston, really ascending as a true star in the league, raises the ceiling of this team and of the power play and potentially of Jason Robertson's even strength line as well? The early lines in Dallas with Robertson out, it's been Dodonov on a top line with Hintz and Johnston. To me, that kind of screams placeholder. That screams this is Jason Robertson's spot alongside Hintz and Johnston on the top line. And so, those are the other two best offensive players on the team. And that would be a great spot for Robertson to apply his trade at even strength all year. Could that raise his ceiling just at even strength, even? There are multiple layers of the scenarios here that we can work through. But I think we've seen the proof of concept with this player that he can get to that 100+ point plateau. And if the injury is not a big problem, then we could see that again this year. I think the road is kind of paved for that. Obviously pending deployment from De Boer, but it's going to be very interesting nonetheless. And I think you got to be willing to take some swings on players like this. I don't think he's going to absolutely destroy you, where you're taking him. Usually it looks like he's going in the late second, early third rounds in a lot of drafts. And so I don't think he's going to destroy you in that range. And the potential for him to absolutely pop off and really do something for you where he is more towards, like an early second or even late first round value, going into drafts next year. Maybe that's the scenario we get from Robertson this year. Definitely a player with a wide range of outcomes for this year, though. Next up, Cole Caufield. The risk here is, well, we just saw a down season from Cole Caufield. I think a lot of that is to do with, some bad luck, basically. He had a bad shooting percentage. It wasn't what we were accustomed to seeing from Cole Caufield, even from his prospect profile. Last year, he shot 8.9%. The season before, it was up at 16.5. Season before that, 12.2. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle here. I think that regardless of what you think of where his shooting percentage will land, though, Cole Caufield is absolutely an elite shot producer. 11.8 last year, 11.4 the year before. And so I'm not too worried about that. What you can be a little bit worried about is Patrik Laine coming in, and how do these guys line up on the power play? Does Laine steal some of his thunder? Is Laine a bit more of a shooter, and that takes away from some of Caufield's shots on the power play? That's a real worry. I think that's a real downside case for Cole Caufield. I think that Cole Caufield is a better player than Patrik Laine. So, and from that vein, I'm thinking that Cole Caufield should take more from Patrik Laine than Laine should take from Caufield. But again, on the power play, it's a little bit more about how it's set up and how Montreal wants to run that power play. And so there is a little bit of risk there that I am a little bit worried about. And if things aren't going well in Montreal at some point during the season, does Laine go up on that top line and Caufield gets demoted down to try to find some chemistry with a Kirby Dach on a second line or something? That's also a little bit more of a worry now that you have a little bit more depth in Montreal. And so you got to factor these things in a little bit, I think. The reward here, though, obviously, I mentioned already the huge shot production. What if that just equals a whole bunch of goals? What if he is a 16% shooter and he's generating shots at this rate? Like, we could be looking at 40 plus, dare I say, closing in on 50 goals for Cole Caufield in an absolute ceiling scenario. Cole Caufield, definitely one of these guys who I could see having an absolute pop-off year this year, 40 plus goals, point per game, all of that. So I don't want to be out on the player, but I am baking in a little bit of risk that, there are some scenarios now that could be a little bit dicey, a little bit more so than before Laine arrived. Steven Stamkos, number 5 on the list for me here. Anytime you have a player go into a new situation like this, you have to bake in some risk. We've seen it in a lot of places where, a player goes to a new situation and it works out perfect. I've also seen a lot of times where a player goes to a new situation and it's just a little bit of tough sledding at first. It takes a while to gel. Sometimes it takes a whole season to gel. Think about what it took Timo Meier to get going in New Jersey. We could see something similar here with Steven Stamkos. Stamkos, a guy who's played his entire career in Tampa and now comes to a brand new situation for the first time in his career. And how does he react to that, mentally? How does the new situation work out with the power play? How does that all come together? You think that a guy of Stamkos' caliber can figure that out, but, there is always that risk that it doesn't gel just right away, and that ends up taking away a lot of his thunder. Maybe, the underlines are there right away, but the efficiency isn't quite there because the passes aren't quite in the right spot, and it's just not quite working early on, and he has a better second half. But then again, maybe that's a player you don't want to draft. That's a player you want to, look to acquire and trade when you see that it should start to work out based on the underlying numbers that we'll be talking about here at Apples and Genos throughout the season. All of these things we've got to keep in our minds when we're looking at which players to draft this year. The potential reward here is, maybe it's a big fit at 5v5. Stamkos has not had the luxury of, the best 5v5 line mates all the time in Tampa Bay. A lot of the times he's been on more of a second line with like Anthony Cirelli and players like that. So, maybe Tommy Novak takes a bit of a step this year, and he's playing with Jonathan Marchessault, and that's an upgrade on the other wing. And maybe his 5v5 situation is actually better than he's ever had in Tampa Bay, and so that kind of evens things out. Last year in Tampa, he played 18 minutes, 13 seconds. Could he even get even a little bit more than that here in Nashville? Obviously got paid a large amount of money to come there, so they might just decide to lean on him. Last year, 10.9 shots per 60. That was his best shots per 60 mark going all the way back to 2016-17. So Steven Stamkos absolutely still showing that he had it last year. Don't want to discount the player, the absolute sterling resume that Stamkos has put up over his career, but absolutely you have to bake in a little bit of risk of the new situation and that it might not gel perfectly right away. All right, we've got 5 more, but before I get there, just want to re-alert everyone to the Apples and Geos Patreon supporter tier. $2 a month gets you access to Patreon-only live shows, one every month. I already did one for September that you can get access to right away if you join the supporter tier, and that was all about draft strategy. Just kind of brain dumped everything I could think about, everything that I do think about in my drafts, I kind of put into that episode. So if that's of interest to you, $2 a month gets you there. $8 a month gets you to the Apples tier. You get access to the Patreon-only live shows. You also get access to Patreon-only Discord channels. We've already filled the Patreon League, so I won't get in there anymore, but you will get access to show notes. You'll get the show notes for this episode that I'm doing right now. And more importantly for most people in season, you'll get access to all of my weekly waiver wire shows, all those ad targets, those drop targets, the schedule analysis that we're doing in season, all that's going to be published for Patreon members. So that's definitely something that people are going to want to check out. And then also new this year, adding player evaluation tools to give you an idea of how a player is performing currently on the season, whether we should expect positive or negative regression for them moving forward, adding some tools to help fantasy players dig in a little deeper beyond the surface with that. Just kind of drop in a couple players and you can make decisions, roster decisions, trade decisions, etc. based on what you see there. If you're a true degenerate, $15 a month gets you all of the above perks, but also I will answer every single question for you, guaranteed. Let's continue on. I already talked about Jason Robertson. Let's talk about Wyatt Johnston from the Dallas Stars. The risk here really is just that the development finally slows down after a torrid increase to his production last year all the way through. This might just be his peak already. Like, he might have peaked in terms of what he can do in terms of the rate stats. Maybe he continues to put up those rates with more time on ice. That's definitely a possibility, but maybe he doesn't take any more steps that some people are already projecting for him. But the reward here is obvious. More time on ice, that's seems to be a given already. He obviously got even more in the playoffs last year. It was a big focus for the team in the playoffs. That's a good sign heading into this year that they do view him as a centerpiece of this team moving forward. What if he takes another step? What if there is another gear for this player in his third season? The player's only 21 years old. What can he improve on in 2024-25? Yeah, what can he do as an encore here? What can he do with a full season of top line, top power play? Maybe that's in the cards for Wyatt Johnston this year. This is a player that I would not be surprised if he absolutely popped off for 90 plus points. 100 points? Is that out of the question for Wyatt Johnston? I don't think so. I think it's within the range of outcomes. Definitely a ceiling outcome, but I think it's within the range, which is not something you can say for a vast majority of players across the league. So that's the exciting part with Wyatt Johnston. We really don't know how high the ceiling goes for this player at such a young age. He could actually be a true star and a true breakout star this year. Playing with better players this year than he's ever played with before, that's definitely a possibility. So something that I really want to be a piece of. It seems like the story is out with Wyatt Johnston. He's definitely going high in drafts. You're going to have to project a little bit of that breakout for him this year to get him in drafts. But I think that you want to be a little bit comfortable taking stabs on players who have exhibited this high of a pedigree moving into the league so far. Next up here, Mackenzie Weegar. This is a difficult player to assess for fantasy this year. I mean, does he even have power play one on the team this year? And it's a bad team. Calgary does not look good. I really can't say with any certainty that this is going to be a team that scores a lot, even, above the bottom third of the league this year. They might be a bottom third team in goal scoring this year. That's not a great place for fantasy production to bloom. And yeah, there are other challengers. Rasmus Anderson can play the top power play, has done that for years in Calgary. Daniil Maramanov took a turn on top power play last year. Even if Weegar gets most of the season as a top power play, what if it comes to your fantasy playoffs and Daniil Maramanov, they just want to see what they have with him? Calgary's season is down the tubes already, and they just decide, let's let the kid play on the top power play. Let's see what he's got, see what we have in this player. And Weegar just plays a little bit less of a role in the time when you need him the absolute most. That's the risk with Mackenzie Weegar. The reward here, though, is legitimately incredible. This guy is absolutely bonkers peripherals. He's a legitimate shot, hit, block, producing monster. He can score 50 plus, 55 plus points with top power play all season long. That's definitely in the cards. I don't want to undersell the talent of this player. I was big into Mackenzie Weegar 2 years ago, less so last year. He's kind of alternated with my takes on the player, which has been really frustrating to say the least. But underneath it all, he remains a really strong shot producing and play driving defenseman. I think that this is a player that they're going to build around in Calgary for the future. And so maybe he is just that number one defenseman with a bullet, and he's going to play top power play. He's going to play all the minutes everywhere. And he's just going to be that guy that Drew Doughty of this team who plays in all situations and plays a ridiculous amount for this team. And that's going to be very worthwhile in fantasy because he absolutely crushes every category that we want. Is he going to score, 20 plus goals again? No, that's not going to happen again. But double digit goals for sure. I think even if he doesn't hang on to power play one all year, I think double digit goals is in the cards for Mackenzie Weegar. And so you're really just kind of trying to weigh the downside risk of the team and the power play scenario versus the upside where, depending on your league's categories, if it's a bangers cats league, Mackenzie Weegar could be easily a top 5 defenseman when all is said and done, just by virtue of all those peripherals. That's the high risk, high reward scenario with Mackenzie Weegar, maybe the most high risk, high reward player in the league this year for fantasy. Next up, Juraj Slafkovsky. The risk here is just we have such a small sample size of him actually being really good. It was quite good. When he was good, it was quite good. So I don't want to discount that, but it is a little bit of projection to get him here. Obviously, a first overall pick. He has some pedigree there. The reward here takes another step. More time on ice throughout the whole season. Plays on a top line with Suzuki and Caufield. Plays on the top power play the entire year and gets 18, 19 plus minutes on the year. The upside here, Svechnikov plus, I think, big time hitter, 70 plus points. I think that's a possibility for a player like this, and I don't want to be out on a player like that. And I think that you're actually going to be able to get him in a spot where I think it'll make sense. I don't think anyone's really coming for his top line left wing spot. I think that feels pretty secure. They obviously gave him a big contract. They believe in this player. They want him to be good. It is just a scenario. What if Nick Suzuki goes down to injury? What if Cole Caufield goes down to injury? That can really thin out this Montreal lineup in a big way. And Slafkovsky probably still not quite at that stage of his career where he can drive everything himself. He probably still needs those guys around to be, really hitting on this upside scenario. But you can say that for a lot of players across the league as well. And when you have this huge upside in terms of the hits plus the, another step, getting him to, can he push 70 points this year? I don't think that's out of the question. Definitely a player you're going to want to be watching, and doubly so in your Bangers Cats leagues. Next up, Shea Theodore. This is a potential scenario in which he just never really sees power play one for any extended stretch of time. Vegas just uses Noah Hannafin as they did in the playoffs last year. Is that just the scenario for Shea Theodore this year? Vegas is content to use him at even strength and let Hannafin handle the top power play. Theodore's contract is up this year. Does Hannafin just become the number one on Vegas all year for multiple years, and they just decide that Theodore can walk after this year? They don't really mind just using him as an even strength defenseman. But the potential reward here is so huge as well. With power play one all year, I think he could challenge 70 points. This is a wildly underrated offensive talent. Huge shot production from Shea Theodore throughout his career. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, which I think is why he's a little bit underrated as well. But if he has a fully healthy top power play year all season long, I do think this is a player that could be a huge benefit to a lot of fantasy teams this year, especially in points leagues, where his lack of hitting doesn't really come into play so much. So I do see a massive upside scenario for Shea Theodore, but also a massive downside scenario. I will say Shea Theodore can get it done. Like, I don't think, even if he never sees top power play, I think he can still be around a 50-point player. He's that good at even strength that I do think he can get there. But a 50-point player with not a lot of hitting from a defenseman, that becomes a little bit more of a risky proposition in a lot of leagues. So that's where I'm at with Shea Theodore. I want to be in on the player because the offensive upside is so high, but it is a little bit format dependent. It is a little bit risk dependent where you're getting him. I don't want to be relying on him as, my number one defenseman on my team for sure. Probably not even my number two, but if I'm getting him as my number three, number four defenseman on my team, if others in my league are fading this player, I'm definitely willing to take that shot, and hopefully he pays off in a big way. Last one here is going to be Brandon Montour. Big time risk and reward with this player as well. New situation. We talked about it with Stamkos, but going to Seattle, what happens if the underlying rates here just kind of regress with the new team coming from Florida? That's a pretty optimal situation for fantasy production in a lot of senses. What if the role is a little bit less with the new team? What if, they have Vince Dunn, they have some players that they're into in a big way. They have Alexiak, they have Larson there on the back end. What if Montour isn't getting, 24 plus? What if he's more in the 21, 22 minute range and into some sort of power play 1A, 1B split with Vince Dunn? That could be a real-time poor scenario for Brandon Montour, and he could dip below 50 points in that kind of scenario and be a real problem for your fantasy team. But I do think that some of that worry is being factored in, and so I think the reward here, maybe he gets true power play one, maybe he gets 25 minutes a night. They gave him a huge contract. To me, that screams, we think this is at least the power play one guy and probably a top pair guy who's going to skate 24 minutes a night for us. So, if he is that guy on a Seattle team, maybe the Seattle team takes a big step under the new coach. I do think Dave Haxall held Seattle back at times last year. Maybe Dan Bilesma is that guy who elevates this team a little bit, maybe even just by leaning on his best players a little bit more than Haxall was ever willing to. Maybe that's the scenario in which the Seattle team really does take a step this year, and Montour can be a big part of that and recapture some of that top end talent that he showed in the 22-23 season. I do think that's a potential outcome here too. So definitely Brandon Montour fitting the bill as a high risk, high reward player in my mind. That's going to be all. But while we're still here, do check out the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Guide. Head over to the Patreon, click on Shop. It's right there. $7.99 Canadian dollars will get you that document, 141 pages of fantasy goodness to get you prepared for your drafts. Join the Discord community. Click the link in the description. Like, rate, review, subscribe, comment, whatever you're able to do. It does help us out here. But that's going to be all that we've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band. They're there for supplying the music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. That's it, folks. Much love.